Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the May 16th regular meeting of Council. I'd like to first recognize that we are gathered on the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nation. Our clerk tonight will be Ms. Sheila Gurry. Tonight's regular meeting of Council will be held in accordance with the Community Charter and Council Procedure Bylaw 2018, number 7272. The question period sign-up sheet is on the table by the double doors to my left for agenda items only. If during the meeting any member of the gallery has a question regarding an agenda item, please write down your name and the agenda item on the sheet. Members have been granted the authority to join meetings electronically. And tonight we have attending electronically Councillor Turley with us. And the first item on the agenda is the introduction of late items. Ms. Gurry, we have several.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. For late items this evening, we're removing recommendation number 27 on attachment A of the Governance and Priorities Committee meeting from May 9th to be considered separately after the remainder of the agenda items, as well as adding the following delegations. Number 1, Paul Chapman. Number 2, Liz Sparks. Number 3, Aaron Zvetkov. 4, Jane Alcock-White. 5, Paul Sadler. And 6, Bruce Martin. For agenda item 12C, Clean BC Communities Fund grant application for mechanical renewal at Nanaimo Aquatic Centre, replacing the introduction by Laura Mercer with Mr. Bill Sims, General Manager, Engineering and Public Works. And agenda item 12D, Development Permit Application DP 1241 for 6330 McRobb Avenue. We're adding the following delegations. Number 1, Robin Kelly, and number 2, Darush Frozili. My apologies for mispronouncing that. And that's it, Your Worship.
Thank you very much. Motion for the adoption agenda is amended. Moved Councillor Thorpe, seconded Councillor Bonner. All those in favour? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Motion for adoption of the minutes is circulated. Moved Councillor Martman, seconded Councillor Hemmons. All those in favour? Any opposed? Motion carries. On to the Mayor's report. As some of you know, our famous Clippers are engaged in the playoffs right now, unfortunately having lost 2 games of the 2 games played so far. I may be placed in jeopardy of carrying through with my bet with the Mayor of Penticton. I have offered to wear their team jersey all day and during a council meeting, pay $100 into a charity of their choice, and deliver a tray of Nanaimo bars for their council meeting. They will do the opposite, except I get a bottle of red local wine. So I'm hoping the community will be out to support the Clippers as they're playing at home in the next tomorrow night and again on Thursday, that you won't have to see your mayor have to donate money to a Penticton charity when I'd prefer to donate it to a local charity. And I see Nult's here tonight. There's an example of one that would be happy to receive the money. On the annual trunk car sale, that returns July 16th. We're bringing back the popular Nanaimo Recycles car trunk sales. Registration is now open for interested vendors. On Saturday, July 16th, 2022, from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m., residents looking for a bargain or a unique buy can join up to 100 vendors, usually, selling items from the trunk of their cars in the Country Club Centre parking lot. It's a fun event and a good chance to see that things don't end up in the dump, that things get actually reused by people who need them and want them. On a more somber note, I would remind everyone that as the weather gets warmer, and Nanaimoites do, as they do every year, seek out a wonderful variety of activities on or near the water or in it. Within city limits, there are beautiful beaches, isolated islands, lovely lakes, and refreshing rivers for a whole series of sports and activities. But please be careful. Residents are encouraged to stay safe because 66% of drownings that occur in BC happen between May and September of every year. The Life Saving Society website shows that 24% of these occur in relation to boating accidents, powerboats, canoes, and inflatable craft. So please, exercise caution. At a special meeting on Monday, May the 9th, Council adopted the City's 2022-2026 financial plan, which includes the 2022 city budget. This year, property owners can expect a general property tax increase of 5% and a 1% increase for the General Asset Management Reserve, equating to an additional $139 or $11.58 a month for the average home in Nanaimo. Obviously, if your home is worth less than the average or it's worth more, you'll end up paying less potentially, and it could potentially end up paying more. And obviously, our budget this year in particular focuses on what I would call a return to the new normal, and includes a number of initiatives to support council priorities, including enhancing public safety in the downtown, addition of 7 new RCMP members, 3 new members, 4 geographically targeted members, implementation of the Downtown Nanaimo Safety Action Plan, funding the new Nanaimo Prosperity Corporation to help advance the city's economic interests, supporting good governance and effective service delivery with the continuation of a multi-year project to implement a corporate asset management system, fighting climate change with the fixed annual contribution to the Climate Action Reserve Fund to support energy and emissions management initiative plans and projects, and investing in our community with, amongst other things, $480,000 for 5 years to support the recommendations and initiatives in the Health and Housing Action Plan. Also funding recreation opportunities such as the Harewood Artificial Turf Fields, Loudon Park improvements, Marie Davidson Bike Park improvements, Maffeo Sutton Playground Phase 2, and Westwood Lake improvements. And this is election year, so the city is seeking experienced election workers for the 2022 general local election to be held Saturday, October the 15th. Anyone interested in working in the election can call out for an application form and submit it via email to elections@nanaimo.ca or drop off in person to the Legislative Services Department located in City Hall at 455 Wallace. Applications must be received by 4:30 p.m. on Wednesday, June 29th, 2022. I would encourage all of you who've done so in the past to apply, and if you haven't, do it also. It's a wonderful experience, and you'll make the life of our Director of Legislative Services, our clerk for tonight, Ms. Gurry, that much easier if she doesn't have to go trying to press gang people to make sure that democracy functions in Nanaimo. And I'm going to say something terribly serious tonight around elections. As we see more of the world's democracies under challenge all around the world, as we see the suppression of media in countries that is critical of the existing governments, it ill behooves people in a democracy like ours to only turn out roughly about 30% is the general number of percentage of voters who vote in municipal elections in this province. In the last civic election in this community, it was around 40%, which reflected significant community concern. I'd like to think that Nanaimo will go against the grain this coming October and see a return of at least 40% of our voters coming out to pick members of council and fill the mayor's chair. So thank you for that tonight. We have a matter to rise and report on, Ms. Gurry, and that is the 2022 Design Advisory Panel appointments. At an in-camera meeting held on May 2nd, Council appointed Kevin Crastel, Marie Leduc, and Kian Shimizu as members at large on the Design Advisory Panel for a 3-year term. Councillor Brown is the appointed council representative, and Councillor Hemmons is the alternate. And I must say, the buildings you see going up around our city reflect the hard work of what is a volunteer committee composed of people who give a significant amount of their time to ensure that the buildings that we are erecting in this community, in the private sector, and indeed the public sector as well, are in fact attractive additions to our community. So I want to congratulate the 3 of them, thank the councillors for their continuing to work, and look forward to the work of this committee. We have no presentations tonight. We have committee minutes for receipt only. I'm going to ask for a motion for adoption of the consent items subject to the removal of the items we're going to be voting on separately, which is the Governance and Priorities Committee recommendation, Attachment A, recommendation number 27, respecting changing the buffer between industrial lands and the Cable Bay Trail from 50 meters to an average of 100 meters. Are there any other items that council members wish removed from the consent? Seeing none, ask for a motion. Moved Councillor Bonner, seconded by Councillor Thorpe. All those in favor of adoption of the consent items? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. We are now on to what I referred to, which is the Attachment A, Recommendation 27, change the buffer between industrial lands and the Cable Bay Trail from 50 meters to an average of 100 meters. And we have a number of delegations tonight, and the first is Paul Chapman. Mr. Chapman, if you could come to the mic, introduce yourself, give us your address, and you will have 5 minutes, and at the 4th minute, I will tell you you've got 1 minute left. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor and Council. Hello, my name is Paul Chapman. I live on Franklin Street in Nanaimo. I am the Executive Director of the Nanaimo and Area Land Trust, also known as NALT, and I have the great good fortune to live and work in the territory of this Nanaimo Nation. I am here tonight to speak about the 100-meter buffer between Cable Bay Trail and neighboring development. I want to talk about how we arrive at 100 meters. It isn't a whim, it isn't arbitrary, it is not just 100 is twice as good as 50. To explain why the 100-meter buffer is not only appropriate but essential, I'm going to show you a couple of maps utilizing the 2020 Global Canopy Height Layer. This will show you significant stands of trees averaging more than 30 meters tall. This is what you and I would recognize as mature forest if we were walking through it. A large area of tall trees. On the maps, green represents parks and protected areas, dark green represents mature forests within parks and protected areas, and purple represents mature forests outside of parks and protected areas. So this first map shows where these mature forests exist within the city boundaries and focuses on 3 areas: Hammond Bay, Westwood Lake, and Cable Bay. There are also some significant stands in the land subject to development as the sandstone properties, but maybe that's a discussion for another day. Of note on this map, as compared with Hammond Bay and Westwood Lake, if you look at Cable Bay, the vast majority of the mature forest there exists outside of parks, outside of protected areas. So when we tighten the focus on Cable Bay, we see the trail, and the trail as it travels through that mature forest. This mature forest supports a number of values and services, such as critical habitat, connectivity corridors, riparian and riverine protection, slope stabilization, flood mitigation, shade to offer respite from heat extremes, and recreation opportunities for our community. When we decide on a buffer, it is to support these values and protect them from the edge effects of development. Edge effects such as windfall, sunlight intrusion into the understory, introduction and proliferation of invasive species, noise and light pollution, and the other effects of development activities. There is a rule of thumb to mitigate edge effects and preserve the values that mature forests provide. The rule of thumb is this: the buffer zone should be at least 3 times the length of the tallest trees. So the buffer zone, it should be 3 times the length of the tallest trees. As we see from the mapping, these trees are more than 30 meters tall. Therefore, 100 meters is the minimum buffer that is appropriate to sustain this forest. Less than 100 meters is the arbitrary number. 100 is the minimum to protect these values from edge effects and development. Less is less. We have a great opportunity for the city, Nanaimo Forest Products, and the community in general to come together as champions to protect this mature forest and the values we hold dear, and to strike that balance between the economic opportunities that our city needs and seeks, as well as those natural values that we hold dear as our home place. So thank you for this opportunity, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bonner.
Your Worship, actually, that was a question for your mayor's report. I have no question.
You don't get to question the mayor's report,
Well, maybe later.
but I'll let you do it later. I'm not seeing any questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Chapman. Much appreciate the thoughtful presentation. The next is Liz Sparks. Good evening. If you can introduce yourself, give us your name and address. You'll have 5 minutes. I'll let you know when you got a minute left.
Thank you. And good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Liz Sparks, and my address is 424 Watfield Avenue in Nanaimo. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak. I apologize if I stutter or trip over my words. Public speaking is very terrifying for me. But what is more terrifying to me is the loss of the green spaces that we really treasure here in Nanaimo. And given the nearly 19,000 people who have signed the petition to preserve and expand Cable Bay Trail, it's clear that many others feel the same way. We're very much concerned, as I know you are, about the future of Nanaimo and the environment. As an environmental science student graduate and a lifelong resident of Nanaimo and the RDN, I can say with certainty that a huge part of what attracts and keeps people in our city is the harmonious balance that we have between nature and the urban style of life. Before you, you have an opportunity to preserve a small piece of that natural beauty, and it will benefit the current and future generations of the city. So I'm really hoping that you will take that opportunity tonight. A larger buffer zone at Cable Bay will allow the vast number of people who walk the trail every day to fully immerse themselves in the forest around them, without the interruption of the grayness of the cityscape and the industrial zoning. As Nanaimo grows and expands, more and more people will seek that quiet solace of Cable Bay trails and other green spaces like it for the many positive mental and physical benefits that green spaces provide. I'm sure you know that one of Nanaimo's most appealing features to both current and potential residents is the outdoor recreational offerings. We should not be shrinking these green spaces as the demand for them continues to rise. We should be expanding and protecting them. I voted for nearly every single one of you who I see seated here tonight. And that decision was born from the hope and the trust that you'll make the decisions that take into consideration the best long-term interests of the city and its residents. Given that you're here, it's fair to say that other Nanaimoites also put their trust in you for that same reason. We know that you'll preserve the things that matter and make our city and the RDN beautifully scenic and desirable places to live. Please save as much of the Cable Trail as you can. And by doing so, you'll have done a great and meaningful service for public health long-term. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. No questions. The next delegation is Aaron Zetkoff. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. Aaron Zetkoff is possibly appearing electronically.
Good evening, Mayor and councilors.
Hi,
hope
good
you can
evening.
hear
If
me.
you could just introduce yourself for the record and
Sorry, my name is Erin Setkoff. I live at 1679 Janes Road, Nanaimo.
thanks very much.
I'm very thankful for this opportunity to talk about an issue that I'm passionate about, which is preserving existing green spaces in and around Nanaimo. We've all heard about old growth forests and their value in terms of biodiversity. And so we might be asking, why is the forest surrounding Cable Bay Trail important to preserve if it's been logged before? It's not old growth, as was pointed out last week, but I would counter that by saying that even a second or third growth forest can become old growth again if we leave it intact for long enough and allow it to mature. Despite this forest being previously logged 2 or 3 times already, when you walk through it, you can see that it's already been recovering. There's diversity in terms of the hummingbirds, owls, eagles, frogs, lichen, ferns, and many other inhabitants that live there. All of these species add to the diverse ecosystem, something we know is increasingly threatened. And the one thing that these species all rely on is a viable habitat, which this forest is currently able to give them. An aspect that I think can't be overlooked is the value of these natural green spaces for people's well-being. You may have seen in the news recently that doctors are beginning to write prescriptions for nature, which brings me to my next point, that Nanaimo has an opportunity here to take advantage of its unique natural environment that's distinct for that of Vancouver or Victoria or other large cities. Those large cities are much more developed. They have seawalls, public walkways, breakwaters, and manicured gardens, but they don't have as many close by, easily accessible wild green spaces. In terms of tourism, we have a cruise ship port and no cruise ship stopping here for the last few years. So I say let's take advantage of our relatively close proximity to Cathedral Grove and continue to build on the identity of our natural wonders, such as the spectacular tides that flow through Dodds Narrows and the wildlife, including seals, whales, eagles, and otters that it attracts. Cable Bay Trail Park itself is just a narrow strip of land that leads down to the water. It's bordered on both sides by private land, which also separates it from Joan Point Park and Dodds Narrows. But how great would it be from a tourism perspective if we could preserve the land surrounding the trail by turning the entire area into a park? We could develop more of a trail system through the forest and set it up as a key reason to visit the Nanaimo area. So imagine doctors writing prescriptions for patients to go to Nanaimo to spend time in these empty, wild, green forested areas, and spending time in our hotels and other attractions. And cruise ships seeing Nanaimo as a destination and stopping here regularly. Preserving this land from development doesn't just leave a forest, it also leaves tourism opportunities. But none of this is possible without you taking the initiative to preserve the forest and stop development from chipping away at its natural beauty. Once it's cut down, leveled, and paved, there's no going back. So that's why I'm asking you to take this opportunity today to preserve this forest and its diversity, health benefits, and tourism potential. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm not seeing any questions. The next delegation is Jane Alcock White. Good evening.
Hi there. Thank you, everybody. My name is Jane Alcock White. My address is 2083 Fern Road, Nanaimo.
Thank you.
And
Please.
I'm going to echo some of the sentiments that you have just listened to. So the discussions regarding the Cable Bay Trail and the surrounding lands are focused primarily on development and specifically industrial development. It is my opinion and the opinion of thousands of others, 19,000 plus, who signed the Save the Cable Bay petition, and countless others who likely would sign that but are simply unaware of the issue, that the focus should be on protecting the Cable Bay Trail from the impacts of development and expanding the trail boundaries to include Joan Point Park. So while the Cable Bay Trail is considered just a trail, the City of Nanaimo website includes such activities. Sorry, there's a lot of noise in the background here. At this location as wildlife viewing, scenic viewing, picnicking, and beachcombing. These activities are suited to a park setting, not a trail surrounded by industry, which is what this discussion is all about. The currently agreed upon 100-meter buffer from industrial operations is really just the bare minimum, as Paul Chapman was explaining, and to consider that this could be reduced to 50 meters demonstrates a lack of ecological awareness. So I am in support of recommendation number 27 at a minimum. Not only is 50 meters inadequate for allowing any sort of normal environmental processes to take place, it is inadequate to protect trail users from the impacts of industry. The Cable Bay Trail is a starting point for trail users to experience the surrounding forest, the seaside, Joan Point Park, and the abundance of flora and fauna. At approximately 2 kilometers, this trail is a significant walk, and to allow industrial development within sight and sound of this trail would completely change the experience. We know for a fact that people walk this trail for the experience of the trail itself because it is surrounded by forest. Local residents have counted up to 67 cars parked in the parking lot and down both sides of Nicola Road past the stop sign at a single point in time. This is because this area is considered a destination park. Just this weekend, I met on the trail people from Yukon, Denmark, Sweden, and Ireland who were visiting this area and specifically came to enjoy the Cable Bay Trail. And as mayor and council, it is your job to consider how to meet the needs of the population. How do you ensure that you're balancing social, economic, and cultural opportunities for current and future residents? I've participated in all stages of the Reimagine Nanaimo process, and my observation is that there's a heavy emphasis on the social and economic factors, but with an observable lack of cultural opportunity. So cultural values are difficult to define, but they include broad concepts such as how to exist in harmony with community and the surrounding environment. So to simplify, you can divide culture into 5 values: social, symbolic, spiritual, educational, and aesthetic values. Now, while some of these values are represented in the Nanaimo area, some of them are not. Of particular importance pertaining to industrial development, especially in areas that have high value as parkland, such as the Cable Bay Trail and proximal residential neighborhoods, is the aesthetic value. There are many studies on the management of buffer zones and the aesthetic impacts of adjacent contradictory development in urban parks and remote parks, whether that be industrial or residential development or clear-cut logging. While the effects of these types of development differ, the impacts to aesthetic values is similarly negative.
One minute.
Thank you. To discuss this 50-meter or 100-meter buffer zone without careful analysis of the aesthetic values and associated impacts to the Cable Bay Trail and the surrounding lands is poor decision-making. Any development should only be approved if it is not going to degrade important park and trail values, and these include ecology, recreation, cultural, and archaeological, which, by the way, there are First Nations archaeological sites of note in several areas around the Cable Bay Trail and surrounding lands. So is industrial development really meeting the economic needs of Nanaimo? Does the expansion of Harmac and possible increased employment opportunities within this sector balance the loss of opportunity to other businesses? There are many small businesses in Nanaimo that rely on ecotourism, nature-based education, and access to natural spaces.
If you could wrap up, please.
Okay, my business is one of those. I'm a small business owner. I ship products across Canada and the United States. I teach workshops to teachers of the school district, for example.
If
and
you could
access to
wrap
nature.
up, please. Sorry.
Okay. Anyways, access to nature is critical for my business. And I think other small businesses like mine should also be given the opportunity to weigh in on this.
Thank you. 5 minutes is 5 minutes.
I tried
everybody.
really hard. I tried hard. I have another letter from somebody. They wanted
Again, you've had your 5 minutes. Thank you.
Okay. I think
The next delegation is Mr. Sadler. And I think you know the drill by now. Introduce yourself, your address, 5 minutes. When there's 1 minute left, I'll let you know.
Thank you, Mayor and Council, for the opportunity to make a presentation tonight. I'm Paul Sadler. I'm the CEO at Harmac Pacific's mill, owned by Nanaimo Forest Products. My address is 5520 Bayshore Drive in Nanaimo. So I'm here today to provide NFPL's input into the OCP process and in particular the question around the Cable Bay Trail buffer. I'll start first by just pointing out, Nanaimo Forest Products, it is an employee-owned company. We've got about 350 employees working there today. We work with a lot of local companies, and we contribute about $1.5 million of taxes to the city of Nanaimo, and we have a significant impact on economic activity in the region. We spend about $250 million a year just running the plant. So it's a big business to run, but we have a lot of good people behind the operation. I'm going to roll the clock back a little bit here and mention that in the early 1990s, it was Harmac's management team, as a part of McMillan Bloedel, that offered the city of Nanaimo the Cable Bay Trail in exchange for a road easement on for White Road. It was Harmac's employees that built and organized the construction and built the trail and the bridges that the public uses today. A little over 2 weeks ago, NFPL acquired the property west of the Cable Bay Trail. That's why I'm here tonight, and I've had to have a bit of a crash course on property acquisition and development issues. Those of you who've probably been looking at my delegation application request for today's meeting, and it does show a desired outcome of a 50-meter buffer on the lands adjacent to the Cable Bay Trail. Now, the 50-meter buffer that's in my application was based on recommendations coming from the Reimagine Nanaimo draft report, which was prepared by staff and professionals. Certainly NFPL and myself saw this as a starting point in analyzing the needs of the community, including the Cable Bay Trail users. So it's evidently clear, though, that NFPL, it's evidently clear to us at Harmac that Council wishes to define the Cable Bay Trail buffer now, during the OCP process. To that end, NFPL will support the OCP policy that an average 100-meter buffer, which is estimated at 27 acres of property, will be allocated to the Cable Bay Trail adjacent to our lands, and that during the future rezoning process, NFPL will work with the city to implement the average 100-meter buffer, taking into account topography, environmentally sensitive areas, and other considerations that improve the effectiveness of the buffer zone. During the rezoning process, NFPL will work with the city to determine how community amenity contributions, park dedications, or other means can be identified in exchange for the land added to the buffer. Also, as part of the rezoning and subdivision process, ownership of the buffer may be transferred to the city and designated as parkland. NFPL is very committed to contributing to the buffer around the Cable Bay Trail and protecting environmentally sensitive areas, while at the same time creating additional jobs, taxes, and associated economic growth through expanded industrial uses.
1 minute.
That are sought after in the Duke Point area. That's my presentation, and I'm free to answer questions.
Thank you very much. Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would just like to thank Mr. Sadler for coming to present today, and yeah, big thanks to Harmac or Nanaimo Forest Products for being such a mainstay in the community, and yeah, the employee ownership has been pretty inspirational for I think a lot of people, and yeah, I'm really happy to hear the support for the 100-meter buffer, and it's wonderful that the story of Nanaimo Forest Products is becoming the owner of these lands, and the developers. The story will be part of the story of saving a good chunk of the Cable Bay forest. So thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Sadler. The next is Bruce Martin. Mr. Martin, same thing. Introduce yourself, address, 5 minutes. I'll let you know when you have a minute left.
Okay, hello. Thank you, Mayor and Council. My name is Bruce Martin. I live on 5934 Cathedral Crescent in Nanaimo. I'm a 58-year resident, born and raised in Nanaimo, 38 in Nanaimo, 20 in Lantzville. I'm speaking on behalf of the 350 employee owners, shareholders of Nanaimo Forest Products and Harmac. I'm a director of the company, as well as a director of the employee ownership group. What I'd like to say is we all use those areas. I'm an avid walker of the Cable Bay Trail, Westwood Park. Jack Point is one of my favorites. We are the people that are best suited, in I think anybody's opinion, to look at any future development of any lands around the Harmac area. We're passionate about it. There's a reason why we all bought into the mill and we decided to live here and stay here. So I feel that the city of Nanaimo and the users of these, the other users of these, the Cable Bay Trail, for instance, are very fortunate that you have people like ourselves. 350 people, I'll tell you, if you look around your neighborhood, you don't have to look very far till you find somebody who works at Harmac or is supplied a job through supplying Harmac. And like I say, we're not going anywhere. We're not a group from out of province or out of country. We're here and we're for real. We do have other partners. Some partners, I guess we've got two that live just down the road, Cedar by the Sea, and at the Yellow Point area. We've got partners that are, one is in Victoria, Surrey, and I guess furthest away would be Williams Lake. Like, we are fairly local people in its entirety, all of the shareholders. We support a payroll of approximately $43 million a year in the Nanaimo area. You think about $43 million, what that will do with responsible people who live and love the area, are working at that. They're good union jobs. I was part of the union effort to help spearhead the buyback, and I'm sure you're familiar with it, Mr. Krogh. And we were fortunate. So nobody had to leave town. We all got our jobs back. And I want to reiterate that we are here because we love being here. We use the water. We hike the trails. I'm as familiar with Cable Bay Trail, Joan Park, Dodd Narrows, False Narrows, Gabriel Island, Silva Bay. Hey, that's where we play, all right? And we are serious about it. So I guess that's really all I have to say, other than the fact that my wife and I became grandparents yesterday, and we look forward to when we can enjoy Cable Bay Trail with our grandson, just as we did with our son and our dogs, and as well, possibly we can supply our grandson with a job and be proud about it. So anyway.
Thank you very much, Mr. Martin.
Thank you.
Any discussion on the...
Questions?
I don't see anyone. Oh, Councillor Gesselbrock wants to ask.
Thank you, Worship. Thank you very much for the presentation. I was just curious, I just recently learned that Harmac Nanaimo Forest Products was involved in the actual construction of the trail. And I'm curious, were you involved at all in that? And
No,
stories from that time?
No, I've got about 30. I was a contractor out there before I became an employee. I was a contractor off and on for 5 years. So no, I wasn't part of building that trail. I sure wish I would have been, because it'd been a nice project to get out there and hike around on the trail for the weeks it would have taken to make it. But I wasn't, no.
Yeah, great. Thanks. No, thanks again for the many contributions to the community.
All right, thanks.
Councillor Thorpe.
I have a question to staff, if now is appropriate.
Please.
Your Worship, thank you. First of all, if I may, I'm quite honestly blown away by the announcement tonight by Mr. Sadler, Mr. Martin. I came here prepared to defend a 50-meter buffer, and I'll state that. I've always been in awe of Harmac's contributions to our city. Through the years, you've been a main economic driver to Nanaimo, but you've also been an excellent corporate citizen, and your gesture here tonight certainly speaks to that in spades. My question through you, Your Worship, to staff, Mr. Lindsay, and I think Councillor Bonner brought up this idea or suggestion last week. Could the additional 50 meters added on to the original 50. First of all, let's back up. I've had emails saying that you shouldn't be reducing the buffer from 100 to 50, when in fact, we're talking about a right-of-way through private property, which had a buffer of 10 meters, which we increased to 50, which I thought was enough. And now the proposal is to increase it, again, double it to 100. So there is no way we're reducing a buffer. Anyway, my question, Mr. Lindsay, is could this generous offer from Nanaimo Forest Products be considered as part of a community contribution? The idea of a park dedication alongside of the trail was mentioned. Is that something that could be looked at?
Through your worship to Councillor Thorpe, I'd say at the time of rezoning, where we negotiate community contributions, amenities, buffers, park dedication often make up part of the package. In this case, we're talking about a significant portion of the land. And our staff's response would be that that would absolutely be an appropriate community contribution. Their community contributions, as council's aware, are voluntary and would be necessary for the applicant to make that proposal. But I believe it would be consistent with what we've seen in other applications, and from what I've heard tonight is one logical outcome of this process. Yes.
Thank you very much. Well, again, I think we're looking at an excellent corporate citizen here, and I hope that those talks can be held if and when that we get to that stage, and some agreeable arrangement can be made. Thank you.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to staff, when this came up a week ago, I asked the question, is all or most of the trail part of a road dedication? And I believe, I wasn't convinced I got the whole answer. So I don't know if I was correct in believing that the majority of it is part of a road right away.
Through your worship to Councillor Turley, maybe I'll do a better job of answering the question than I did last week. But there is a no
offense.
Yeah, no, there is what is considered to be an unconstructed road right of way. It's actually a titled property that looks on paper like an unconstructed road right of way that connects from the city boundary up to the waterfront, and that property is approximately 20 meters wide, which is consistent with a normal road right of way. The existing trail meanders, and we had a plan, sorry I don't have it in front of us this evening, but we had a plan last week that shows the exact location of that trail, and it meanders throughout that 20-meter wide property along the length of it. So I'm not sure if I'm any closer to answering your question or...
Yes, you are. And the reason I bring it up is because my experience in living here the majority of my life and as a commercial property owner and a business owner at the time is that generally any road that needs to be widened or the dedicated road has to have additional property added to it. It's usually done through an easement, a purchase of the or an expropriation. And I'm not suggesting that that's would be appropriate here, but I'm thinking my concern is this leading us down the path of something that might become the norm in the future, which of course as a business person I would have a tough time agreeing with. You tell me there's something different about this than there is with a normal road.
Your Worship, I think I understand what Councillor Turley's concern. What I would say is that I don't think it sets a precedent. I think every situation is considered on its own merits. In this case, the city, through its plan, is looking at taking land that's currently designated for high-density development with the golf course development. That's the current city plan, which I would note has a 10-meter buffer from the trail. And in exchange for that designation is proposing industrial designation under the new OCP. In that case, it'll be one of the larger and most significant additions to heavy industrial land in the city, certainly in the last 40 years, I would say. And it's because of those reasons that it was felt that there needs to be take extra steps to buffer the existing amenity that's there from that future industrial development. So I think it is somewhat unique. I don't think it's unusual to buffer obviously conflicting land uses with adjacent amenities, but I do think we'd look at every situation on its own merits.
And one final comment as a councillor who worries about where income comes from, I couldn't help but thinking that one of the delegations said that there were 19,000 people signed the petition, and I'm thinking, like, if they were to kick in $100 each, that's 1.9 million. It goes a long way to increasing the buffer. So, just a thought. Thank you.
Councillor Gesbrock, did you have something else?
Thank you. No, I was going to just move the recommendation.
We don't have to move it. It's already on the table by virtue. I'm going to get the last word here, because this is too amusing for me. I can't resist. So last week, Nanaimo's leading lefty defended the working classes at Harmac from losing 11 acres of land without potentially any compensation. And now, here a week later, the working classes at Harmac have abandoned me on the field, apparently an anti-environmentalist and a foe of forests. I am making a joke here tonight. I am delighted by the comments tonight of both Mr. Sadler and Mr. Martin in terms of their concern for the users of the Cable Bay Trail. And so I will happily support the motion tonight accordingly. Now that I've inspired Councillor Hemmens and Gesselbrock, let's not drag this evening out too long when we're all going to say yes.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll be brief. I just want to acknowledge, obviously I'm going to support this. I think this is wonderful that Nanaimo Forest Products is meeting us in the middle here. I do want to note, though, that we were really in a business versus environmentalism tension, and I think that tension doesn't serve us. We're going to continually, as we grow as a city, come up against this. And I think when we do that, when we entrench into if the environmentalists get it, then it's anti-business. But if it's business, then it's anti-environmental. And I just don't think that's true. And I would encourage everyone to think a bit more holistically. And I'll just give you a really good example, or what I think is a good example. When this property develops, we are going to be receiving property tax from them that will pay for our Parks and Rec programming, which is a heavily subsidized program in the city. So to say that this is, this supports just the people who want to walk the trail, and I'm a lover of the trail myself, but this actually, when we're doing development sensitively and well, it benefits everyone. And so I just wanted to say the mayor took some hits over email, and it just, this isn't a business versus environmentalism issue, or if it is, I think we need to step back from that kind of thinking. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you. I do believe we got to move the motion.
Yes, Your Worship. I was going to say it was pulled before you moved the remainder of the items, so this one does need to be moved.
Very good. Moved Councillor Gesselbrock, seconded Councillor Martman. Any need for discussion?
Oh, can I speak to it?
Oh, yes.
Thank you. The Cable Bay Trail is a regionally significant trail, and after our last discussion, I went out there immediately to just check out exactly how big 50 meters was, or 100 meters, and 100 meters is definitely a minimum of this area, and I recognize there's money involved, the land has value, Nanaimo Forest Products has made a purchase, and just one comment that stuck in my head reading a book by our old central banker, Mark Carney, but on paper, Amazon, the company, is valued at over $1 trillion, but the Amazon rainforest has got no value on paper unless it's cut down and turned into soy plantation. And I think just the nature of how our economic system works, the value of land for its ecological, recreational purposes isn't captured, and it really is up to decision makers to bring that value in and make decisions that are taken in that bigger perspective. And I really appreciate over the last week the discussions that did occur to come to a conclusion, and I really appreciate Nanaimo Forest Products coming forward, around looking at the 100-meter buffer, and I think it speaks to sort of the growing sentiment and understanding that we really do need to protect the lands that are around, because we are growing as a community, and a lot of the areas that we've taken for granted to be able to walk to for nature space has really been a large part of our identity as a community. We're starting to encroach upon, and decisions are going to need to be made, and what and how we go about preserving and protecting these places, and to find the balance moving forward. And so I just really appreciate what was demonstrated here today, and I look forward to walking that trail, and for Nanaimo Forest Products endeavor in developing the new industrial lands that they'll be owning. So thank you.
Thank you very much. All those in favor? Any contrary? Councillor Turley? Motion carries. Very good. We have no delegations unrelated to agenda items. The next item are reports, Code of Conduct for Council and Committee Members. Ms. Gurry, you're going to introduce this?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I'm really happy to be here this evening, and good evening again. I'm going to introduce Ms. Robertson and Mr. Rees-Harding, who's joining us via Zoom, to speak to the item on your agenda tonight. It's a code of conduct and complementary bylaws to go with that based on new legislation. And I think it's really exciting because after this council was elected, you made it a priority to achieve governance excellence and adopted that in your strategic plan. And I believe this brings you as far as you can to accomplishing that throughout your term. So I'm really excited to turn it over to Ms. Robertson and Mr. Harding. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gurry. It's challenging stuff. Ms. Robertson, good evening and welcome.
Good evening, Your Worship and Council. I too am pleased to be here tonight again to co-present with Rees-Harding on to talk about the upcoming legislative changes to community charter related to codes of conduct. So Council was briefed on this topic in the closed session on May 2nd, so Council could ask questions of Mr. Harding at that time. And based on that discussion, Council directed staff to bring forward the necessary bylaws and policy to tonight's meeting for consideration. The details on the bylaw and policy are in the staff report, but I will provide a brief overview of each of the documents and then turn it over to Mr. Harding, who will provide a high-level overview of what was discussed at the March 2nd closed meeting, and then take questions from Council. So just a bit of a backgrounder, as outlined in my report, the impetus really for the new legislation coming forward started in 2018 with the Working Group on Responsible Conduct. And this was a group of individuals consisting of UBCM, LGMA, elected officials, staff, and some legal experts who advised them. And this work provided a bunch of resources that came out of it, and those resources were then presented to UBCM, who in turn developed a resolution and presented it to the convention at 2021, which was supported. And it was then forwarded to the province for consideration. In response to that, the provincial legislature introduced amendments to the charter, and 2 were put forward that would add new requirements for councils and regional district boards to consider developing or updating their codes and a regular process for reviewing them. The first amendment, which would be under section 113.1, would require councils to consider developing a code or review ones that may be in existence. It would need to be done within the first 6 months of the first regular council meeting following the general election. If council chose not to do that at that time, the reasons would need to be cited, and then section 113.2 would come into effect, which would require a council to reconsider that decision prior to January 1st, 2026, the next election. In preparation for the new legislation coming forward, representatives from the working group, of which Mr. Harding was part of that group, spoke at a corporate officers forum, and with the hopes of providing advice and guidance and responding to questions from the corporate officers about how to go and develop a model code. And in that meeting, the panel suggested that even though the legislation would be mandatory for new councils, corporate officers may want to consider bringing that forward to existing councils for discussion so that the new council would have a clear understanding about code conduct rules and expectations prior to the election. The city currently does have a code of conduct policy, but it is foundational in nature only, and so there are no processes in place or accountability provisions contained within it. So one would not know how to address a conflict if it arose. And best practice tips, as outlined in the model guide that was developed, state that before getting into a situation where misconduct may become an issue, conduct standards should be in place that includes a process that's identified within the code. And so for these reasons, staff felt that we should bring this forward to the current council to have the discussion. So based on the direction at the May 2nd meeting, staff brought forward for consideration a code of conduct bylaw that if adopted would replace the existing policy. And I will provide an overview of the 4 main sections. Part 1 includes the definitions and the scope, and the most significant definition is that of commissioner. It would be applicable and apply to either a formally appointed commissioner or, in the absence of a formally appointed commissioner, the option to use a third-party investigator, which would be referred to as an ad hoc commissioner. The scope of the bylaw applies to council and committee members' conduct only, as staff is excluded because their behavior is governed under the city's respectful workplace administrative policy. Part 2 is where you find the existing foundational principles found in the existing policy. But Part 3 has companion provisions that were added that have been included related to behavioral expectations connected to the principles in Part 2. And I'll just, those are there for council to see. Part 4 outlines the accountability provisions and processes for breaches, complaint handling, and disciplinary action, which support the behavioral expectations in Part 3. Having the processes in place is advantageous for a few reasons. It helps everyone understand the process by which council and committee members will be held accountable, which increases public confidence. Members are more likely to comply if there are known consequences for contraventions. It eliminates the need to reinvent the wheel, and consistent use of the same process helps to ensure that everyone is treated fairly. Some municipalities who have existing codes have utilized the mayor and CAO to oversee informal complaints and then utilize an ad hoc commissioner for the formal complaints. And this was considered as an option. The challenge is that utilizing the mayor and CAO can be risky and could potentially, depending on the matter, could cause damage to the elected official and staff relationship. Therefore, the bylaw before council recommends the use of a commissioner, whether it's appointed or ad hoc, to assess and administer both processes, and this just helps to keep the process completely neutral. Staff would have a role, but it would be more in terms of supporting the process. So for example, the CAO could be in a position to provide advice about approaches to resolve conflict and also provide those opportunities at the council CAO sessions to do those check-ins to support trusted working relationships. Although the bylaw also applies to committee members, the behavior and complaint process under 4.2 is a little bit different, and that's because committee members are directly accountable to council. So council would be the appropriate body to determine what measures would be taken for alleged breaches. In this instance, complaints against committee members would be referred to the mayor and CAO, and recommendations would be made to council, if any. Another important provision in this section is the way that matters are reported out to the public. The City of Vancouver's bylaw, for example, states specifically that it will deliberate and vote on sanction hearings in an open meeting to ensure accountability is retained, and these same provisions have been included in the bylaw before council tonight. Section 4.4 outlines the terms for coverage of legal fees for council members. The bylaw specifically states that legal fees will not be covered for a council member who chooses to seek legal representation if they are involved in a complaint. However, there may be instances where it is warranted, and in those cases, a member can request council to consider reimbursement provided it's their first offense and it does not exceed $10,000. Provision has been put in place to prevent malicious complaints as well, and 4.5 outlines the ramifications for anyone who makes an allegation or complaint that is found to be vexatious or malicious in a malicious manner. And the last point I wanted to cover off about the bylaw before I move on to the Ethics Commissioner bylaw is that it is proposed to come into effect in October 15th, and that way it will be in place for the new council. So I thought this might be a good chance to pause for a second to see if council has any questions, or I can keep going forward with an overview of the rest.
I'm not seeing anyone, Ms. Robertson.
Okay.
Please carry on.
So in terms of the commissioner position, the model guide suggests not using staff, as we talked about, but rather to use an independent person who has the specific skills and knowledge to investigate the complaints. The individual to oversee the processes could be formally appointed, or again, an ad hoc, hired on an ad-need basis.
Sorry, Councillor Turley has a question now. Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Worship. To you, to Ms. Robertson. Sorry, I just want to clarify on the ability or lack of ability, depending on the situation of a councillor, to seek legal advice. Who makes that decision as to whether it's warranted or not?
The default position is that the legal fees would not be covered. However, that doesn't prevent the individual member who's part of the investigation to actually seek reimbursement for those fees, provided it's their first offense, or doesn't exceed 10,000. So council would be the deliberating body that would make that decision.
So my only concern about that is if you have a situation, and I can't think of an example, it doesn't really matter, but where there's one or two councillors that are in opposition, shall we say, not a friendly opposition to the rest of council, and there was a claim made against them, the likelihood of being reimbursed for legal fees is, I would say, slim and none. What happens in a situation like that?
Through your worship, to Reese, would you like to take that question?
Sorry?
I'd be happy to, Ms. Robertson. Through your worship to Councillor Turley, you can't predict all circumstances with respect to voting patterns as it relates to circumstances that you've raised, Councillor Turley. So your point is a good point, but the bylaw is doing the best it can to exclude the indemnification bylaw so that the opposite concerns that have arisen in other communities don't actually develop. We don't want automatic indemnification for anybody who seeks it under your indemnification bylaw, because that could cost the city a great deal in legal fees. We've tried to find a happy medium with respect to providing legal coverage for those individuals who want to seek legal advice. Of course, in some circumstances, you won't need legal advice. Some you will, some may choose to get it, some may choose not to. But we tried to place a bit of a happy medium in there in regard to having it available for first concerns or first contraventions to a maximum of 10. But as Ms. Robertson points out, it's a council decision. So those decisions will, of course, be subject to the context and the nature of the council decision-making group at the time. I don't think that there's any other way to answer that than truthfully.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And Councillor Thorpe.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. And I think I brought this up when we had the discussion earlier. I share Councillor Turley's concern over this particular point. I will be supporting the bylaw overall and recognize that we can always tweak it as we go along. But I think it's a valid concern. I wanted to ask through you to staff, maybe Mr. Rudolph can help me. Is this indemnification separate from the fund which I thought we had set up for obtaining legal advice on conflict of interest situations?
Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Your Worship. So council actually has moved previously, in a previous amendment to the spending and amenities bylaw, to remove the fund that you had for conflict of interest. So you no longer have that in your spending amenities policy. Sorry, it's not a bylaw, it's a policy. So you no longer have that clause in there. And with this commissioner, whether ad hoc or a permanent position, which, by the way, would still only be then paid for when it was used, that commissioner position. It wouldn't be paid a regular salary. It would only be paid when you used it if it was a permanent commissioner position. They would be able to provide you conflict advice as a lawyer if that was who was hired, but you no longer have the money allotted to you in the council spending and amenities policy. That was removed. It was a decision of council, this council, to remove it from the policy.
All right, thank you, and I apologize. I didn't recall that we had done that, but in my defense, that policy has been in a state of uproar for a little while, so I guess I missed that change.
Yeah, so that was this term. It was a change this council made, and this is separate, as Mr. Harding and Ms. Robertson has stated, to our indemnification bylaw, which does defend and allow defense of council and staff that are involved in any suit against them in the course of doing their duties, as long as they were doing so, they're carrying out their duties in good faith. So we still have the indemnification bylaw. It just doesn't apply to the code of conduct because we don't want to have malicious complaints made and then have your legal fees paid for in that instance.
Mercifully, Councillor Thorpe is right. We've been remarkably free of litigation. Amen. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship. My question is regarding the appointment of the Ethics Commissioner. In 4.5, the appointment of the Commissioner can only be made suspended or terminated with a 2/3 vote of all council members. What happens if you can't get a 2/3 vote? You can only get a majority vote.
then the position, through your worship, would retain until the end of the term, and then council could revisit at that point when the term expires.
No, but this is also to the appointment. What happens if you can't even appoint them? Like, say you have an issue come up and council is split 5-4, so you can't pick a ethics commissioner.
Through your worship to Mr. Harding, I believe the establishment would just be majority, but the termination would be 2/3.
Through your worship to the councillor and through Ms. Robertson as well, that's my understanding of the reading of the establishment bylaw as well. It's not the appointment that requires the 2/3 vote, but it's the removal that requires it. So I would think that the appointment would require only a majority vote. I would sure hope in the circumstances whenever you're appointing someone into a position of this nature, though, that it would be a unanimous vote. But I'm just going to check my copy of it. Yeah, 4.5 talks about the appointment of the ethics commissioner made only suspended or terminated by 2/3. So I don't think it applies to the actual appointment of the individual.
Well, what I'm looking at here says the appointment of an ethics commissioner may only be made, suspended, or terminated by 2/3 vote.
On second reading, Councillor, you might have a point, actually.
Well done, Councillor Bonner. It's not the old carpenter's measure. Measure twice and cut only once.
I'll send you my invoice for the later, yeah.
To Mr. Harding's earlier point, the appointment would hopefully be a unanimous vote of all of council in these circumstances. That would be.
We could do one. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's fine, Ms. Robertson. Go ahead.
We could address that right now with the change or leave it at 2/3, but we could address it and just ensure that that is put in right now before council gives any consideration to readings.
Through your worship, back to Councillor Bonner, I'd suggest, quite frankly, leaving it as is. I think if council can't appoint an ethics commissioner with a 2/3 vote, that you probably should take a second look at who you're appointing.
Okay, that's fair enough. Just ask.
I think that's wise advice. Councillor Brown.
Thank you. I'm actually going to disagree with that. I think very much it should be 5-4 because I think there could be cases where obstruction, and I think we don't need to look any further than the Senate in the U.S., where obstruction becomes the name of the game rather than advancing things. So I think that the point is 5-4 is it gets you over the line and it takes a serious vote to remove at a 2/3 vote. So I would very much support the amendment to a 5-4 appointment. And I think that's why the majority of the existing legislation is set up that way, where it's a 5-4 to appoint and a 2/3 to remove.
I think my feelings have just been hurt. You're suggesting we're like the U.S. Senate. I think we should conclude. Councillor Bonner, one more? I was going to suggest that we could conclude Ms. Robertson's presentation and then perhaps discuss that aspect at length.
Okay, thank you, Worship. So as Ms. Gurry pointed out, in both cases, the individual, whether appointed or ad hoc, would just be utilized on an ad-need basis. It's definitely not full-time. If adopted, the bylaw also would become in effect on October 15th, and then the new council could decide whether they wish to pursue the option of formally appointing an ethics commissioner. But in the absence of doing so, it would default to the use of an ad hoc commissioner until that happens. So any other questions on the ethics commissioner?
Not seeing any.
Okay, the council spending and amenities policy. This was another recommendation put forward by the working group, was to implement compensation provisions for breaches to support the expectations and also to help in assisting to offset the costs associated with the formal investigation, because that's the more costlier process. So provisions have been added to section 2.4, which is highlighted in red in your package. And it's based on language that is in North Cowichan's remuneration bylaw. And just quickly, it's basically somebody who is found to have breached the bylaw for the first time would have their remuneration reduced by 10% for a 12-month period from the date of the breach. Second breaches by the same individual would be 15%, and third and subsequent breaches by the same individual would be 25%. If endorsed, that portion of the policy would also take effect October 15th, but we did take the opportunity to reinstate the provisions to authorize council's attendance at meetings and seminars related to municipal government that are within Canada, provided they're within the budget. And if supported today, that portion of the policy would come in effect immediately. That's it in terms of the council spending policy. The last item is the oath of office bylaw, and it's really a companion document to support the conduct, whether it's in the existing policy form or any amendments that may come in the future, including consideration of the bylaw tonight. And this is something that UBCM strongly supported having endorsed for new councils, and so staff also recommend that this bylaw be considered and adopted even if you decide not to pursue the Code of Conduct bylaw. And that concludes my portion of the presentation, so I can turn it over to Mr. Harding.
Thank you very much, Ms. Robertson. Mr. Harding.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Ms. Robertson, for that. And good evening, Mayor and Council. It's a pleasure to see you all again. I'm going to cover with you 4 areas tonight. The first area is a very brief overview of the legislative and court authority behind codes of conduct. I want you to be assured that you have the authority to actually put one of these into place. So we should discuss that briefly. Second, I want to talk with you about key themes of a good code of conduct. And that's going to provide an opportunity for me to review your draft with you a little bit more, because I'm happy to say that all of these key themes show up in your code of conduct. I want to give you a very, very high level commentary on best practices elsewhere around Canada and BC. And then fourthly, give you the chance to ask me questions and have any discussion that you would like to have. I'd like to try to get through this presentation on my end in about 10 minutes or so. So I'll move fairly quickly. First, let me address the legislative and court authority for codes of conduct. Despite there being no current mention or any authority whatsoever in our current Local Government Act or Community Charter, our courts have ruled on 4 separate occasions over the last decade or so that local governments may in fact choose to have codes of conduct on top of the other sort of ethical provisions within our community charter in relation to confidentiality, codes of conduct, conflicts of interest and things of that matter. It's based really on 2 different pieces of authority in the community charter, section 114, which is your incidental powers, and section 154, which is your power to delegate functions. That would include delegating to an investigator or ad hoc commissioner or some kind of more permanent commissioner. As you know, and as Ms. Robertson mentioned, in November of last year, the community charter was amended to include for the first time new sections, 113.1 and 113.2, that require all local governments, both regional districts and municipalities, to consider in their first 6 months of after the general election whether or not to enact a code or not. It's not a requirement to have one, it's a requirement to consider having one or amending one that's already in place. Last I looked, which was late last week, these provisions were still not in effect, but I would suggest they will be shortly, if not before the October general election, likely very soon thereafter. So bottom line, Mayor and Councils, I want you to rest assured that you're on solid ground to enact a code of conduct of the one that's before you, if that's what you choose to do. And you're also getting out ahead of section 113.1, as Ms. Robertson mentioned to you in her comments. Key themes, I'll move to the second theme, key themes in a good code of conduct. The first is that a code of conduct realizes its greatest potential when it's aligned with other documents that set standards for elected officials. So here, what you've heard already is that your code of conduct is aligning with your oath of office, with your spending and amenities policy, and also not mentioned in some ways, it's aligning with your procedure bylaw as well, because the code of conduct does pull in the decorum provisions from your procedure bylaw into the code. So you're really, in essence, aligning 4 different policies and bylaws in one through your code. So this is a very positive thing that your code is doing. Second key theme is your draft Ethics Commissioner Establishment Bylaw provides you with some flexibility, which I think is a really good thing. Your draft allows council to choose later a more permanent person if that's what you wish to do, or an ad hoc individual through the CAO's office, which provides that flexibility in implementation. And I think that flexibility moving forward will be a good thing for the city as you decide in your next term how you want to sort of structure this office if that's what you decide to do. Third, the standards and values or the aspirational comments are part of the bylaw that Ms. Robertson mentioned. These are very well considered in your bylaw. The city has set sort of robust integrity, accountability, respect, leadership, and collaboration principles in its bylaw. These are well articulated because they're based on a lot of work by the Working Group on Responsible Conduct that came up with a lot of that principled work, and it's been pulled into your bylaw almost in its entirety. These are not enforceable directly. We want to make sure that's clear in your bylaw, but they're there as interpretive guides and foundational principles for the elected officials themselves. So to be clear, you couldn't file a complaint. Someone couldn't file a complaint only on the basis of the aspirational values. We found with other experience that that's a mistake and opens up the door to some relatively difficult complaints to process. So they're there for direction and interpretive principles only. And I think your bylaw does a very good job at expressing them. Fourth is the wide range of behavioral expectations is captured. And your bylaw does a really good job in part 3, 3.1 to 3.9 specifically, to encompass a series of different types of behavioral expectations that are not found in the Community Charter or the Local Government Act. Some are, but some aren't. It includes compliance with all city bylaws and policies, interactions with staff, public media, public meeting expectations, social media expectations, and then the more usual conflict of interest, confidentiality, gifts, and influence provisions. So your code in draft form does a very good job at setting a wide range of behavioral expectations on the elected officials. Fifth key is good process around informal and formal resolutions. If there are complaints in future, which there likely would be in the next term of council, hopefully there aren't many, but if there are, you'll want to have expansive informal dispute resolution procedures. We think that draft codes of conduct should focus on informal before formal. One, it's better if people talk and resolve their own concerns, but it also costs less money. It's more inexpensive through an informal process usually than through a formal investigation. We have to use outside investigators, etc. So this code contains in several places a number of off-ramps for informal resolution. And that also helps design against weaponizing a code of conduct for perhaps use by those who are not as serious about using it in a meaningful way. So your code does a good job in that regard. There's also the next key is good process around intake and the ability to refer out or dismiss summarily. You've got a very clear intake process designed in this code at section 4.1.2. And you've also got very robust jurisdiction to dismiss complaints if they're frivolous, vexatious, where there's no jurisdiction, or if they should be referred to other agencies, something like the BC Human Rights Tribunal or the police. So there's very directive language in the code to move matters to the appropriate place or to dismiss of them if they're not appropriate. The next key is to really strive to draw a good balance between openness and public disclosure and protecting privacy. And your draft ensures anything that's released publicly will comply with FIPA as a starting point. That's, of course, very important. We don't want to be breaching people's privacy or personal information. So your code makes that very clear. The draft also says that investigations themselves, so the work done by your ad hoc commissioner, will remain confidential. But council's votes on censure matters will be public at some point, unless there's a valid reason to exclude the public. So the code itself necessitates public disclosure, but it also protects the ability to go into closed where need be. So it's a nice balance between the openness and public disclosure that I think most of us want and aspire to, but also knowing that at times you're going to have to discuss things behind closed doors, and the code contemplates that as well. So it's a good balance in the draft between the openness and privacy concerns. The next key is you want to strive to offer procedural fairness to the elected officials who are actually under investigation. We need to protect the respondents in this process to ensure that they're treated fairly. And your code does a really good job at that. It does it in 4 places. There's notice of the allegations. There's the opportunity to respond to the allegations. Then there's the notice of the meeting where any investigation report would be discussed. And then there's also the opportunity to be heard before any censure or sanctions are imposed by council against the respondent councillor. So there's actually 4 different opportunities for procedural fairness in the process as it relates to the elected official who's under investigation. Last, and I got other themes I could do, but for the sake of time, we're going to stop here. The last thing is to have your censure and sanction language as clear as possible in the code. And this draft sets out really well at section 4.1.10, the whole series of items that are potential sanctions in the event that the council wish to impose that against one of its own. Includes things like letters of reprimand, training, suspension or removal from committees, censure itself, so a public censure, and as Ms. Robertson pointed out, a reduction in remuneration under your policy. So again, I could say more on the key themes, but I've isolated those 9 for you tonight, and all 9 of them are taken taken very well into account actually in the draft code of conduct that's before you. Now, just a couple of words on best practices elsewhere to kind of put Nanaimo in context. Where are you at? Speaking nationally for a minute, Canada, most of the provinces are well out ahead of British Columbia when it comes to code of conducts around elected officials at a local government level. We really are well behind, lagging behind almost the entire country. We're one of the few places left that don't have mandatory provisions for codes of conduct for local elected officials in our legislation. By way of super contrast, the City of Toronto is the leader in Canada. They've had an integrity commissioner employed by the city full-time for well over 20 years now. I think they're into their 3rd generation of legislation in Ontario. Every Ontario municipality must have a code of conduct, and every Ontario municipality, no matter how big or small, must have access to an integrity commissioner. It doesn't mean they have to have them on staff, but they have to have at least a relationship with somebody who can actually administer their mandatory codes. They're sort of the leaders in the country that way. But by way of even closer comparison to us, you could look to Alberta, Saskatchewan, or Manitoba and find much more robust legislation in those jurisdictions than we have in British Columbia. Manitoba particularly has a particularly good regulation. In BC itself, many local governments, as you know, have chosen to date to adopt codes of conduct, but they're very different, and many of them are very ineffective or brief. Many of them are old, have been drafted in a time frame where there really wasn't much thought or account given to codes of conduct. However, in July of 2020, a couple of years ago, the City of Surrey was the first municipality in British Columbia to adopt a robust code of conduct with a full-time ethics commissioner model. They were the first to jump out of the gate in that regard, and that's been an ongoing office in Surrey for the last 2 years. City of Vancouver followed in January of 2021, doing the same with a robust code and a full-time integrity commissioner. When I say full-time, I don't mean they're paid or on staff, but these individuals are available to those municipalities 100% of the time when they're needed for both educational, advisory, and investigatory responsibilities. They're the 2 most robust codes in British Columbia as it stands right now. I would say, by way of comparison, that your draft code of conduct will be right up there, frankly, with those 2 codes. And in many ways, it's actually better. It's had the benefit of having injected into it the experience from those other jurisdictions to learn some of the lessons that have been learned along the way, particularly with the lessons learned in Surrey, as that code has rolled out over the last couple of years. So your code gets the benefit of having some of the more challenging aspects of Surrey being ironed out, if I could put it that way, in the current draft of what you have before you. So what's before you, Mayor and Council, is actually, I would suggest, near the top, if not at the top, best practices code that's available in British Columbia at the moment. And your staff have done a really fantastic job pulling together sort of the best pieces from across the jurisdiction. Not pretending that it's perfect, because it's not. It will likely have to be amended within a year or 2 after if it's adoption, if Mayor and Council choose to do that. But it's a very good starting point, and I don't have many bad things to say about it, in all honesty. So those are my comments with respect to where you're at as it relates to the provincial and the national context. And as for the 4th item, it's questions and discussion. So I'll stop there and turn it back to you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Let's deal with these in order then. And the first is the Code of Conduct bylaw. Are there any questions for staff before I call on Councillor Martman? Councillor Martman, please. Go ahead.
Motion that Code of Conduct Bylaw 2022 number 7348 to regulate the conduct for council and committee members pass first reading.
Seconded. Councillor Thorpe. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries.
Motion that Code of Conduct Bylaw 2022, number 7348, pass second reading.
Seconded, Councillor Hemmons. Any discussion? None?
Yep.
Sorry, Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll make it brief, but I do want to comment on this. I just think it's such an important bylaw that we're discussing, as are the subsequent ones, and I want to thank Ms. Robertson for all her hard work on this very complicated issue and file and the work that you've done. And also Mr. Harding and his comments, which I really value. I think, in my personal opinion, that the number one priority of any municipal government is responsible conduct and following a code of conduct. Even when you might not think it's necessary to have, believe me, it is until you need it, and then it's too late if you don't already have it. And my memory on recompense for conflict of interest wasn't very good earlier tonight, but my memory for January the 25th of 2021 is good, because on that date, this council voted 5-4 not to endorse a set of principles of conduct recommended by Mr. George Cuff, an acknowledged expert on good governance. And I was very disappointed at that. So I'm glad we've moved on from that. And I appreciate Mr. Harding's comments that responsible conduct is not limited to behavior around the council table. It involves acknowledgement of proper roles and responsibilities, appropriate interactions with staff, social media policy, knowing how to stay in your lanes, and so on. So there's a lot more to it than might be thought on the surface. So again, I'm happy to support this. I'll also be supporting the bylaw regarding the Ethics Commissioner or Integrity Commissioner, which previous councils had basically begged the provincial government to take the lead on, and that never happened. So I'm glad that we're doing that at least. And as far as the oath of office, I might as well comment on that as well. Up to this point, I've always found it totally meaningless, so I'm glad that we're beefing that up, and it has some actual substance to it. So happy to support all of these. Thanks, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Thorpe. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Your Worship. Too want to thank Ms. Robertson, Mr. Harding, and Ms. Geary for this. I think it's excellent work. And I think this is fundamentally different than what's been looked at previously. This is comprehensive, very holistic, and has meat to it. You know, there's consequences to poor behavior. There's consequences to, in my opinion, behaviors that aren't becoming of the position in the office. And it sets out a clear trajectory for what is acceptable and what is civil, and the importance of the work that we do through discourse and ultimately democracy. So I think this is very, very important work. Don't think that can be understated. I think it's fundamentally different from work that has been proposed in the past, and I just want to thank all those that worked on this. I think it's really important, and it's very forward-looking, so thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Worship. I just wanted to thank staff, and this council has really stepped forward in demonstrating good, responsible governance, and this bylaw takes it a step further and just instituting it into our city processes through bylaws. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I agree with all the three previous speakers. All those in favor? Any contrary? None. Motion carries. Councillor Martman.
Motion that Code of Conduct Bylaw 2022, number 7348, pass third reading.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. With respect to this one, Ms. Gurry, just to confirm, if there's a desire to change, it should be done at second reading. Ms. Gurry?
Yeah, Your Worship, first reading would work. And I have a really simple change should the suggested one by Councillor Brown be the one that council as a whole would like to go with. And that's on, I'll just find it in my agenda here. What page was it, Karen? Me too. It's in the bylaw for the appointment of an ethics commissioner. Page 94. And it's just to take out the word made in section 4.5. So it would read, the appointment of an ethics commissioner may only be suspended or terminated by a 2/3 vote of all council members. So by taking out the word made, the position could be suspended or terminated by a 2/3 vote. But then if you look at section 4.1, it takes care of the appointment, where it states that council may by resolution appoint an individual to the position of ethics commissioner and approve the terms and conditions of the appointment. So it just requires a resolution. So it's covered, the appointment is covered in 4.1, and by removing the word made from 4.5, then it just covers the 2/3 for suspension and termination of the position, if that makes sense.
Sorry, removing the word may in 4.5?
That's it.
Then it would read the appointment of an ethics commissioner only be made? No.
It would read, the appointment of an ethics commissioner may only be suspended or terminated by a 2/3 vote of all council members. To Councillor Brown's point, he believed that the appointment should be a simple majority.
Right.
But the termination or suspension would be the 2/3 votes of all council members. That was my understanding. But council can decide to amend it however they wish.
Thank you. I'll get...
Ms. Robertson has a
Councillor Bonner,
comment too.
question?
I was just going to say that the appointment is covered off under 4.1. It says council may by resolution appoint an individual to the position of ethics commissioner. So with that simple removal of the word that Ms. Gurry referred to under section 4.6, that would cover it, because it's defining only the suspension and termination by 2/3.
Sorry, you just said 4.6. Ms. Gurry said 4.
Or sorry, 4.5, my apologies.
Your worship, to clarify, the word that would be removed is made, M-A-D-E. I think there was some
Sorry.
confusion. There was some confusion there that it was the word may. It wouldn't be may, it would be made.
Made.
Yeah,
That's
so-
why I wasn't understanding it.
Yes, sorry, MADE, M-A-D-E. So Ms. Sponigal has it up on the screen here for you now. So 4.1 covers the appointment, which is just required by resolution. Ms. Sponigal, could you go to 4.1 just quickly first? So council may by resolution appoint an individual. So it doesn't talk about a 2/3 vote there. So it's just the appointment. Then 4.5, if you removed the word made, M-A-D-E, it would read the appointment of an ethics commissioner may only be suspended or terminated by a 2/3 vote of all council members.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Councillor Bonner, something?
Thank you, Worship. Talk about throwing a spanner into the works. I would be in favor of that motion. I would put forward that motion.
Well, let's get the motion first on the table before we amend.
Okay.
Okay,
Or
move
can we
that,
can we work on the basis that that's the wording of it, Ms. Gurry?
I'll work on it, let's come back.
Given the bylaws is,
they removed the word made.
They can move for first reading, because it hasn't been made.
right, but we haven't even put it, the bylaw in front of
And we're fine.
council yet is what I'm getting at.
I think it was.
Sorry, we're just discussing the best protocol here, and I don't know if Reese wants to jump in, but because the bylaw hasn't received its first reading yet, you can make the recommendation to do that change, vote on it, then give the bylaw first reading and carry on.
All right, so Councillor Bonner is moving the change to drop the word made, seconded by Councillor Thorpe. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any
Councillor
opposed?
Bonner wants to discuss.
Sorry, Councillor Bonner?
Thank you, Worship. And you know, sorry for causing all this problem, but I looked at it as a worst-case scenario where, in theory, you could have one counselor doing something bad, and so there's a complaint against them, but that counselor then only has to find 3 more people to agree with them, a minority of council, to put the whole thing off the rails. So by this change here allows us to, that it's the majority of council, and the minority can't rule the majority. So that's why I'm in favor of the change. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Brown? Did you wish to?
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. I just want to note that it's consistent with our appointment of other officers as well. So CAO, financial officer, and clerk. So
Thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. We're now moving forward with the amended motion, and we need Councillor Martman to move.
Move that Ethics Commissioner Establishment Bylaw 2022, number 7349, to establish an Ethics Commissioner or ad hoc Commissioner pass first reading.
Seconded, Councillor Bonner. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Councillor Martman.
Motion that Ethics Commissioner Establishment Bylaw 2022, number 7349, pass second reading.
Seconded, Councillor Bonner. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries.
Motion that Ethics Commissioner Establishment Bylaw 2022, number 7349, pass third reading.
Seconded, Councillor Bonner. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. The next is Elected Officials Oath of Office Bylaw. Councillor Martman.
Motion that Elected Officials Oath of Office Bylaw 2022, number 7350, to establish the oath or solemn affirmation of office for mayor and the office of councillor pass first reading.
Seconded, Councillor Hemmens. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Councillor Martman.
Motion that Elected Officials Oath of Office Bylaw 2022, number 7350, pass second reading.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. Any discussion? Comments? All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries.
Motion that Elected Officials Oath of Office Bylaw 2022, number 7350, pass third reading.
Seconded, Councillor Hemmens. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. The final one is the Council Spending and Amenities Policy. I don't think you have to read that out, Councillor Martman. You're moving it. Seconded by Councillor Bonner. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you very much, Council. Nice to be ahead of most people in British Columbia. Mr. Harding, thank you for your attendance tonight. Ms. Robertson, Ms. Gurry, everyone who worked on this, echoing all the council members who thanked you. It's good.
You're welcome, Your Worship and Council. Pleasure to assist. Thank you.
Thank you. The next is the Downtown Nanaimo Safety Action Plan. Mr. Lindsay, good evening.
Thank you, Worship. Here this evening, simply just to introduce the final copy of the Downtown Nanaimo Community Safety Action Plan and seek Council's report in officially receiving that plan. Council has had a very detailed presentation at your Finance and Audit meeting back in April, where the recommendations were endorsed and, more importantly, ultimately adopted and included within Council's recently approved financial plan. Mr. Nielsen Strategies, who was engaged to prepare the report, is with us this evening. He's not doing a presentation, but he is available if Council has any questions about the report itself. I would mention, and it makes note that one of the recommendations out of the report is develop an interdepartmental working group to help implement the plan. That work has started, and that group's been meeting now for 3 weeks since Council finalized the plan, actively trying to move forward as quick as possible to implement the variety of recommendations that are included within the report itself. Either Mr. Nielsen or I happy to take any questions Council may have.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Mr. Nielsen, and Councillor Turley has a question already.
Thank you, Worship. Through you to, not sure if Mr. Lindsay or Mr. Nielsen. The one area that I have concern about is the vandalism relief grant, because my understanding of municipal granting is that it's not generally used to support businesses or for-profit businesses. I don't know if you can comment on, tell me I'm way off base, but that's okay. I'd hate to see this thing get unrailed because of a small point like, well, not a small point, but a point like that. So thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Perhaps I can answer just through you to Councillor Turley. Thank you for the question. Yes, you're quite right, Councillor Turley, that it is not typical for councils to give direct assistance to business. And in fact, it's not allowed under the Local Government Act to give direct assistance to business. What we are proposing is to put together a program that would provide some cost sharing for vandalism in the downtown core that occurs or that is imposed on private businesses, and we would provide that through a grant program that is administered by the business improvement areas. The program is based on similar programs in the U.S., but also more or closer to Nanaimo. The City of Victoria and the Downtown Victoria Business Improvement Association has a vandalism relief program in place where the city has provided some funding through the BIA to offset the costs. There's a maximum amount that each business can apply for to offset the cost of vandalism that occurs in the downtown area. So it's not meant to enrich anybody. It's not meant to necessarily even offset the entire cost, but simply as a quick interim measure that can be implemented through the BIAs and therefore within the law, is to provide some city assistance to those businesses that, by virtue of the fact that they're downtown in that area where we've got some social disorder, that they can get some assistance with the vandalism and the graffiti that may occur there.
Thank you very much. So it's actually very similar to what used to be with the kind of the store frontage grants that were available for heritage buildings downtown.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay,
yes, very
great.
much so. Yeah, Councillor Jordan. And in fact, Maple Ridge has one in place that is a little bit similar to the one I think you just described, which helps to try to beautify parts of the downtown area and provide some assistance to businesses to incent them to do certain things, either on heritage buildings or in particular parts of the city for businesses.
I feel much better about it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Turley. Councillor Bonner?
Thank you, Your Worship. On page 27 of the report and the tiered response model, the mention here is the city will develop in collaboration with other interested organizations a downtown ambassadors program. And I remember when we had this conversation at our GPC, you had mentioned a specific organization. Are we leaving this generic to allow us to have it with any organization, or are we still interested in the organization that you mentioned at the GPC?
Thank you very much for the question, Councillor Bonner, and through your worship to Councillor Bonner. We have kept it a little bit general because we anticipate that there will be more than one agency that wants to participate in the development of this program and the implementation of the program. We do anticipate that the one...
Oh.
Ooh. We did pay the electric bill, didn't we?
I'm going to take that as a yes. Yeah. Ooh, that would be cool.
Your Worship, I think the answer to that question was yes.
The server for the building is crashed.
Yeah.
Okay, Your Worship. So in this instance, I guess what we do is we revert back to old-fashioned ways where we don't have Zoom and we've lost Mr. Nielsen. So we will have to
Mr.
carry
Nielsen's
on.
on my screen.
He is still on your screen?
Oh, because you're following.
Is he frozen though?
The least able person in the whole room has Mr. Nielsen on his screen.
Yeah.
It's a miracle.
So we have nothing over here. Ms. Gerard, Ms. Bonigal, it seems like the server for the building has crashed.
Yes, the wired internet server for the building is gone, but the Wi-Fi is still up.
Does somebody know how to turn Mr. Nielsen's volume on, so to speak? Notice I didn't say turn him on. I'm not going to make that mistake, but go ahead. I'll get my technical assistant here.
I should stop asking questions.
Press the Wi-Fi button there again.
Oh, press the Wi-Fi. Jim's talking.
Press the Wi-Fi.
There you go.
Mr. Nielsen? I just have to tell you that the server for the... Well, they're having a lovely conversation, but they can't hear me.
Your Worship, may I suggest we take a 5-minute break?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Your Worship, how about we take a 10-minute recess and see if we can get this
Oh,
resolved?
fine, we'll recess for 10 minutes. God. Maybe someone wants to come and tell Mr. Councillor Turley and Mr. Nielsen that they're lost in my Wi-Fi. To the Downtown Safety Action Plan, which we hope will keep our electronic communication devices safe as well. And Councillor Bonner, I believe we were trying to get a question answered for you.
I think it was answered, Your Worship, and I'm fine with moving on now.
All right. Any other questions, comments for Mr. Nielsen or Mr. Lindsay? Seeing none, Councillor Martman, you're going to make the recommended motion. The council receive.
Receive. Move the recommendation.
Seconded by Councillor Hemmens. Before we vote on it, I just want to extend to Mr. Nielsen, Mr. Chief Rich, Mr. Lindsay, all the people who worked with him, and all those who contributed and provided advice with respect to this. I think it's an excellent report. I'm encouraging the good citizens of Nanaimo to take advantage of the city website to actually read the full report. I think it's a useful educational document which gives folks some idea of the challenges that are faced in the downtown and what the potential solutions are. Both from the provincial perspective and a federal perspective, what needs to be done and what the city's trying to do within its jurisdiction. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. And Councillor Thorpe's brilliant spouse has texted in and reminded me that I made a terrible boo-boo earlier. The second game involving the Clippers is Wednesday night, not Thursday night. So if you show up at the arena on Thursday night, my fault. If you show up on Wednesday night, good for you. Clean Water, Clean BC, Communities Fund grant application for mechanical renewal at the Nanaimo Aquatic Centre. Oh, I wasn't listening. Mr. Sims, good evening.
Good evening, Your Worship, Council. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. It's good to be here this evening. It's a good opportunity also to introduce Ms. Jen McCaskill of our Facilities Asset Management Group. She manages that group, comes to us from a highly respected structural engineering firm and is quite intimately familiar with the city's facilities and happens to be also a member of NSAR as well. So she's certainly a strong player in the community. The Clean BC Fund, the Clean BC Communities Fund this is the third intake for this particular grant funding. And it was announced earlier this year, and so there's been a fairly short timeline as these things go. And we're here tonight for a council resolution, if council's in agreement with the recommendations, to support this project for a grant application. And this is really an excellent opportunity to take advantage of significant senior government funding to leverage a lot of work that needs to be done. So in the Nanaimo Aquatic Centre, there's a number of mechanical components, the heating, ventilation, air conditioning system that are near the end of their life and need replacement. And this is a really solid opportunity to replace those, improve operations, improve building function, but significantly shift from natural gas to electricity, a significant shift, and reduce our greenhouse gases by a wide margin. So I'll Ms. McCaskill will take you through the report, and if you have any questions, we're both here, and as is Mr. Groot, who's very familiar with the operation of this facility.
Thank you very much. Good evening and welcome. Nice to see you.
Good evening. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sims. That is a lot of what I was actually going to say, so it makes it really simple. The Nanaimo Aquatic Center has been in service for about 20 years, and that's about the appropriate timeline to be looking at key mechanical systems and looking for opportunities where we can renew assets and ensure the long life of our facility. It's a staple in the community, number of people use it, and it's a great opportunity here to mesh a renewal need for an asset with an offering for funding from senior government and essentially kill those two birds with one stone. So any questions you may have, happy to answer them.
Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Worship. So just for clarity on the grant, it's replacing everything with electrical systems except for like the 7 the heaters or whatnot that are...
Through your worship to Councillor Gesselbrock, the only other thing not being replaced is the natural gas boiler system. We did look at using full electrification there, but it was determined to not be an appropriate use of funds.
And those natural gas boilers will be sorry, I'm not calling them the right thing, but they will be, they're not at end of life yet. And so eventually they're going to hit their end of life, and that would be the more appropriate time to look at switching.
Through your worship to Councillor Gesselbrock, they are at the end of life. What we've done is we've looked for opportunities for really judicious application of electrification and increasing efficiencies while not putting all of our funds into one facility. So if we were to look at electrifying all of the mechanical systems, we're double the budget that we're looking at right now and increasing operational costs substantially. So our intent is to say this is a great opportunity for the Aquatic Center. We have other facilities in the portfolio, and it would be really great to take that additional money and put them into a different facility and ultimately reduce our emissions more significantly than if we just put them into a single building.
Right. So the change out kind of gets us to a 65% reduction of our emissions from that building, and then the rest is the rest of the emissions is the result of those 7 units.
Those 7 and the natural gas boilers.
The boilers. Okay, so we're not changing. Are the boilers end of life as well?
They are. Yeah, we're replacing them with new, higher efficiency natural gas boilers.
Right. So they're at end of life though as
Correct.
well. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I wasn't entirely clear what was being changed out or not in the report. I wasn't able to fully make out what units were being changed to electrical or natural gas. So thanks.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Worship. Through you, I just want to I like to advise all new staff members that given my age, I'm overly sensitive to the term end of life. It's okay, I have to throw that in there. So I guess my question is, what happens if the grant is not approved from the government?
Through your worship to Councillor Turley, staff would be returning to council with another opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. If there's no further questions, someone care to make the recommended motion?
Do I need to read them out? No?
No.
I'll move the recommended motion.
Thank you very much. Seconded Councillor Hemmons. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None. Thank you very much. Sorry, Councillor Gesselbrock.
Councillor Gesselbrock's opposed, correct? Is that, yeah.
Sorry, Councillor Gesselbrock was opposed. Sorry, I missed that. Thank you. The next is development permit application number DP 12416330 McRobb Avenue. And Mr. Holm, you're going to introduce this tonight. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, and good evening, Your Worship and Council. This is an application for an 88-unit rental apartment building in the Dover Bay neighborhood. The proposed building is located between McRobb Avenue. It's actually off Sentinel Drive, accessed off Sentinel Drive, but it's located between McRobb Avenue and Colinda. I'll just ask if attachment B from the report could be brought up, and that'll show you where the property is located. Thank you. So in North Nanaimo, Dover neighborhood area, and you can see the property outlined in red and hatched on the attachment overhead there. And if you could bring up the site plan and parking plan, thank you, attachment D, that's helpful. So it's actually showing, what this is showing is actually that this is phase 2 of a two-phase rental apartment project. The first phase was approved completed in 2016, and that's a 50-unit apartment building. And this is 88 units, which is phase 2 of Dover Ridge Apartments. So this is proposed as a 6-story building, 88 units, which is made up of a mix of studio, 1, 2, and 3-bedroom units as well. And it's proposed as a 6-story building within the surrounding context of 4, 5, and an adjacent approved 6-story building in the area. And if you could please bring up attachment B, the building elevations and details. Thanks. That is providing a detail of the building elevations there, along with the red dashed line through there showing the requested height variance from 14 meters to 19.6 meters is requested for the proposed building. And the applicant and the architect are here to speak to the application and answer questions if needed, but I'll add a little bit about the requested variance. If you could bring up as well attachment F, it'll show the renderings, quite an attractive building style, obviously consistent with reflective, I guess, of the existing building. You can see it's 6 stories there. It actually steps down to 5 stories at one end. They provide a rooftop amenity space there, and the proposed height variance allows the building to occupy a smaller building footprint. They're providing additional amenity space you can see on the ground level, so a tighter building footprint with more site permeability, amenity space at the ground level, as well as they've got a bioswale that they're introducing here, and quite an attractive building. The design panel, the city's design advisory panel, recommended support for the proposal with recommendation to support the variance as proposed. There were a number of design recommendations made by the design panel, which the developer has followed through on, including the step to include the rooftop amenity space, as well as design elements to diminish the, to draw the focal point to the 5th story and diminish the 6th story there as well. You can see that in the design there. It comes through strongly. Yeah, so I'm happy to take any questions, and as well, the applicant is in attendance here, Carmague, representing Carmague Properties, Inc., as well as Dariush Firzuli Architect, Inc. is in attendance as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Holm. Any questions for Mr. Holm? If not, the delegations want to speak? Only if there's questions, or only if there's questions? All right. Since I'm not sensing any great opposition, I think you're safe not to speak if there's no questions. A motion to issue the development permit, moved by Councillor Martman, seconded by Councillor Hemmons. All those in favor? Any oh, sorry, Councillor Turley, I missed you. You're just a little blip on the screen tonight. Ask your question, please.
Thank you, Worship. Yeah, I know, I wish I was just a little blip. Anyway, I would just like to, hopefully there is no opposition, but we had a presentation from Mark Holland at the NPC board meeting recently, and the challenge that Nanaimo is going to be facing, according to him, is meeting it casts a shadow on our ability as a city to provide enough housing for people who want to come here. And that's one of the reasons why some companies are having difficulty finding employees, because they come here, they get the job, and then they go look for some place to live and can't find it. So I'm all in favor of variances like this if it brings us more housing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Turley. Once more with feeling, all those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you very much. Next are bylaws. Councillor Bonner.
Councillor Martman?
No, I think Councillor Bonner wishes to remove himself.
Oh,
See, I haven't forgotten.
I'm excusing myself from this vote because I live across the street, so I believe it's a conflict of interest, once again.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated. We'll wait till you've absented yourself. And then Councillor Martman can please read the motion.
motion that zoning amendment bylaw 2021 number 4500.187 to rezone the properties at 2220, 2020, 32, 20, sorry, 2220, 2232, 2238, 2246, 2254 Northfield Road and 2230 Boxwood Road from single dwelling residential R1, duplex residential R4, medium density residential R8, and community service 1 CS1 to mixed use corridor COR2 with site specific maximum gross floor area for a grocery store be adopted.
Seconded, Councillor Brown. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Perhaps we'll let Councillor
Couldn't remember how to say those numbers.
Bonner back in. Thank you. We have no notices of motion. We do have other business, though. Councillor Hemmens, please. Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Your Worship. With your permission, I will reverse the order in which I deliver these, and I'll share why. So the first I'm going to move is that Council direct staff to pursue the inclusion of space for a new primary care clinic in future public projects such as the South End Community Centre.
And a seconder, Councillor Martman.
Thank you, Your Worship. I provided some background material for Mayor and Council on this, but essentially we know that there's a family physician shortage. It's hit Nanaimo particularly. We have about 30,000 unattached patients here in Nanaimo. At the same time, the city's involved in conversations about new public builds, one of them being in the South End, and some potential partners that we're looking we're working with potentially on that vision is school district and VIRL, and my motion is simply asking Council's permission that staff expand that consultation to the primary care community.
Thank you very much. I'm not seeing any. Councillor Turley?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Hemmens, or perhaps staff. So I'm assuming this is a VHA situation, or the reason I'm asking is there any rental income going to be coming from it?
If I may, I think those are the conversations that we need to have. My intention here is to secure the space. Family physicians don't work for Island Health, so this would be a conversation with the primary care community. Island Health is probably a likely partner, someone we want to have a conversation with at the table, but Island Health doesn't represent family physicians.
So do the family physicians that would be paying the rent? I'm more concerned about providing rent-free to quasi-businesses. That's all.
Okay. Thank you. I'll leave it there.
Very good. All those in favor? Any contrary? Councillor Turley, you're opposed?
No, I put my hand up for
in favor. Sorry, thank you. Very good. Councillor Hemmens?
Thank you, Your Worship. The second motion is that Council direct staff to deliver a report on the possible expansion of the Nanaimo Aquatic Centre Youth Hub model of primary care to other populations and locations in the city.
Seconded, Councillor Bonner. Councillor Hemmens?
Thank you, Your Worship. This is growing from the first motion, and essentially, the City of Nanaimo is partnered with Island Health and Family Physicians right now to provide an innovative model of youth care at the Aquatic Center. I understand that there may be opportunities to expand that model, whether it's with youth or another population I don't have a say in, but if there's an opportunity to provide primary care in city facilities, that's what I'm asking for here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was expecting the other order of motions because I think they're closely related. And I appreciate the background material that Councillor Hammond sent out. But when I saw this one, and again, maybe my memory is faulty, but I recall when the Youth Hub model at NAC opened, my recollection, because I was in attendance when it opened, was it was designed around providing a drop-in recreational opportunity for youth in the area, and I don't recall it being in any way a primary health care operation. So when I saw expansion of this primary care, it sort of didn't add up to me. Could you comment, Mr. Harding?
Yes, Your Worship. Thank you to Councillor Thorpe. It is a primary care. It is focused for doctor and nurse services for youth, and it's been very successful. You may be confused with some of the other drop-in that we do a drop-in also for recreation in the evenings pre-pandemic for the back rooms or the other rooms. But this was a model that we were borrowed actually from what the schools were doing at John Barsby and then NDSS. We want to try working with the school board and Island Health, as Councillor Hammond has mentioned, bring it into the Aquatic Center where there's access throughout the year, and it's been very successful. So students and youth can come in through a front door versus going down a school hallway. And it's also open for those who aren't permitted in certain schools and or holidays, spring break, summer holidays. And so it's been very successful. So much so that they've had to lower their definition of youth. Because it's so busy, they've had to go from a broader definition of youth age to a younger age. So it is a model that's worked well.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the information.
Thank you very much. Councillor Gisselbrock.
Thanks, Your Worship. I just want to say this is awesome. Thank you, Councillor Hammond, for bringing this forward.
Agree.
All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you very much. Is there anything on the question period sheet? That is a negative. Thank you very much. Well, Councillor Martman, motion
Move
for
for
adjournment. Seconded Councillor Brown. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you to staff for working through the joys of technology tonight, particularly.